Hi everyone, it's Henry here. Now, recently I said to you guys, would you mind if I did more fantasy stuff on the channel? And the response was overwhelmingly positive. And as luck would have it, Corvus Belli reached out and said, do you want to make some videos about our new fantasy tabletop game, Warcrow? I was like, yes, obviously, it looks awesome. And they sent through the starter box and they sent through this big main rulebook, which is an absolute whopper, as you can see. And I don't normally do book reviews and stuff, so, you know, please excuse the lighting and all the rest of it. But all of that, so like 80-something% of the book is background, which for me is perfect. When I'm starting a game, it's minis and background. That's what's going to get me into it. My gaming group, they're wonderful. They try all sorts of different games. That was never going to be a challenge. It's the aesthetics and it's the hooks in the background. And for me, the Northern Tribes, which is made up of the Orcs, made up of the Garaghaks, and a few other bits and bobs, it immediately appealed. And I'll talk a little bit more about sort of why shortly. But I just want to say, like, they've given it everything, it feels like, in this. So if you want to dig in, I haven't read all the background yet at all, but there's a ton of minis, ton of background. It's super cool. And I think my favourite part was at the front of the book here. They just credit the whole team, which, again, I don't know whether that matters to you or not, but I thought it was a really nice touch to do with it. But as I say, when the box came through, there's two factions in it, and I immediately went for the Orcs. I just really fancied painting some of these minis. And within that faction, and this is one of the things I really like about it, is most of the factions are mixed races, which for me in a fantasy setting, I find really exciting. Not just allies, but like legit sort of combined factions. And I remember when I was young, I read a book called Orcs by Stan Nichols, and it just presented orcs in this slightly different way, where they weren't immediately the baddies. They weren't sort of mindless sort of barbarian type things, which I thought was really, really cool. And that was kind of the inspiration. So let's paint. Now, all I'm doing here to begin with is a simple zenithal pre-shade. I'm using an airbrush for this, but I'm not going to use an airbrush in the rest of the video. So if you don't have one, just use a rattle can. Just spraying white top down just helps pick out some of the areas of detail, give me an idea of where the light and the shadow are going to fall, but also it just helps me see the miniature a little bit better before I get stuck in and start painting it. But yeah, I love this mini. It's my favourite one in the set, man. I just think that's just a super cool representation, I think, of an Orc warrior. So yeah, really pumped to get painting her. So the reason that I want to do the trousers first is because they are one of the messiest stages of painting. I want to just relax and enjoy painting these minis. I want to enjoy painting an orc in a different way that I've painted it before. It's a really interesting scale, the miniatures for this game. You know, they're that bit bigger. There's lots more to paint. And I wanted every single step of it just to be fun. As I say, everything on it is stuff I like painting. So I wanted to make the trousers a nice kind of warm orangey leather colour. You know, I'm going to do snow basing and stuff for these minis. So I thought, let's try and get a bunch of different warm tones on the minis just to give us a bit of contrast with that as well. So I'm base coating it using Hull Red. You can see there I've used a really quite a dilute mix. It took me 2 or 3 coats to get a nice sort of smooth base coat. Now, there's a couple of clips very early on in the video where the focus is a little funny. I'm still getting used to the new camera, but it does clear up, so don't worry about that. And to get some texture into this leather and why this step is messy, I'm going to use a sponge. Now, to begin with, I'm using a colour aptly called red leather, but it actually lives in my skin colours bag of paints. But it's obviously it's perfect for red leather, and I want to just start sponging it on to create loads and loads of texture. I don't mean physical texture on the mini, which is what I was just doing there, was thinning the paint a little bit more so it wasn't leaving physical sort of lumps and bumps on there. Just watering it down a little, but I mean all those scratches and wear and tear that you see on leather, and I start to mix in a colour called flat flesh into that as well. It's kind of a yellowy, pinky colour, and just keep adding it in and just keep working rough highlight areas. So, you know, where that knee is bent, that the top of it's going to, the thigh is going to be lighter than the, say, the below the knee. But again, not worrying hugely about that. We're just trying to create something interesting. And for me, it was the trousers and the skin were what I kind of wanted to be the focal points or to stand out on the Mini. And therefore, I was going to take them quite a little bit sort of lighter than most of the other areas, but also probably spend a little bit more time on them than the other areas as well. And then once I'm happy with the sort of sponging, I'm going to go in with my brush and just be a little bit more deliberate where I'm putting some of those highlights. So where the folds are facing upwards, that sort of thing. And it's a case of working backwards and forwards. You know, if you go too far, then load the previous colour up and sponge it back over. The nice thing is you just start to create these layer upon layer upon layer of detail on the trousers. And to be honest, the whole paint job here is, as I've said in the title of the video, it's simple techniques. But what we're going to do is just layer them up on top of each other continually to create what I think is a really, really cool looking Mini sort of in the end. But yeah, very, very happy. I'd not tried this recipe before I did the test model anyway. I was really, really happy with it. And again, it's that little bit more real estate to play with. Just means you can have that bit more fun painting it. And what I'm doing here is going back in with the whole red and just painting in some of the deepest folds. Make sure we've got some of that shadow. Make sure we've got some of that contrast of value on the Mini. It's going to help make it easier to read on the tabletop. And from what I can gather, the force that you get in the starter box is roughly half the size of a quote unquote normal game. So you can have I don't know, about 20-ish models, I think, something like that. The last thing for the trousers was just wanted to pump the colour up a little bit. So I've taken Goregrunta, which is a contrast paint by Games Workshop. I've thinned it right down, as you see there on the palette, into a sort of, and I just want to glaze this on. So by that I mean I want to very subtly change the surface that I'm the colour that I'm putting it over. It's just going to make it a little bit more rich, a little bit more orange. Yeah, very, very happy with it. And as I say, the next area that I wanted to put the most focus on was the skin. There's something I think, often guilty of. It's making my Minis too dark and dingy. So I wanted to make sure I was trying to stay a little bit light, a little bit brighter, and make sure I was getting plenty of contrast of value, for instance, on the miniature, not making everything just the sort of same so it sort of blends together at tabletop distance. But also, I love painting orc skin. I don't know what it is. Orcs and dwarves, man. Like I never don't enjoy painting them. And I'll be honest with you, like if our commission chief Ben hadn't pinched the other faction from the box, I'd be all over it. Because again, that's a sort of, how's the best way to describe it? If these guys are your sort of Viking raider type things, then the other faction that you get in the box is kind of your very cosmopolitan, quite advanced tech and buildings and architecture and all that sort of stuff. And that's a faction of elves, humans, and dwarves. So again, I love that mixed race factions. It's just exciting, and the dwarf miniatures I think are outstanding. But Ben likes stripy trousers, so that's why he's got the other guys. Now, for the skin on this, I've started with a base coat of Camouflage Green, and same way I applied the base coats to the trousers, a couple of thin layers to just get a nice smooth base coat. And now I start using Elysian Green by Games Workshop and slowly add in a colour called Verdigris, which is just a really, really pale green to start highlighting. And yeah, just start highlighting the model up. The detail on these minis is excellent. I was quite impressed. And again, the size makes it, nice. I could keep saying that, but it is nice, that little bit bigger, gives you a bit more to paint. But the detail on the face was nicely realised. I could see it all. I wasn't having to make any of it up, which was fab. And really, it was just a case here of, again, highlighting the areas that would be facing upwards more and leaving the areas facing away from that light more in shadow. So once I'd sort of built up a few highlights on the Mini, then I wanted to go in and reinforce the shadow areas. And for this, I used a Deathcore Drab, which is quite a boring sort of dark green. Whereas your sort of Camouflage Green and your Elysian Green, they were staying nice sort of yellow greens. Just kept the shadows kind of boring. Again, like, I think I'm always going to tread that line of, I like things that look quite boring. Like with minis, I just do. But maybe boring's not the right word. But I'm not necessarily someone who loves all these crazy colours in the shadows and this, that, and the other. It's just not my taste. But again, the challenge with that is trying to figure out, okay, how do I make the miniatures still look cool and interesting, you know, on the table and in the hand. And it's a journey, isn't it? And I'm keep trying to educate myself as best I can by reading, you know, your books on your colour theories and your things like that. But for a little bit of additional colour, I wanted a little bit of pink on the ears and obviously the tongue and inside the mouth. And for this, I've used Indian Shadow. I've also blacked out the rest of the area around the face. It makes a huge difference. Partly, I mean, obviously, it just makes it look more painted. I love it. It's a really, motivating stage for me doing that. But also, it just helps me see it better. So, for instance, here on the arm, I've done the Camouflage Green and then I've done the Elysian Green, the first few highlights. And I wasn't quite sure, did I need to do more or did I need to do less? So by blacking out that area around it, it's just let me understand the bit that I'm painting more. And again, when you've only got 10, 20 miniatures on the thing, you can afford to take a bit more time on certain areas. Having said that, I'm spending less time on the rest of the skin than I did on the face. I was enjoying this slightly faster, slightly looser style of painting. I think it's where I'm heading towards if I'm just going to paint something to relax. I want to explore it a little bit further without, you know, trying to make sure everything's super smooth and, you know, super realized. You know, just as long as it looks cool, you know, I'm going to be pretty happy with it. Now, the armor, this was something I was looking forward to doing. As I say, one of the inspirations for me painting these, and also I think in the design of the miniatures and the faction, is sort of Viking, Northman, all the rest of it. And I loved that the armor reflected things like, you know, I'm a big fan of that TV show's Vikings, and I really wanted to try and get a bit of that vibe going on with the armor. So again, quite boring. The metal and the leather was all kind of one and the same sort of color. Didn't need tons and tons of variation in there. And also what I figured that would mean is it would not draw attention from that face and the trousers, which I say I wanted to be quite a focal point. So I've chosen to use a colour here called Exhaust Manifold by Metal Colour Series. The main reason I've chosen to use this paint is actually the properties of the paint as opposed to the colour. I wanted a fairly boring silver that's, you know, it's got a bit of colour in it, but it's not, you know, it's not particularly bright. But the main thing is the fluidity of this paint and the style of the armour. There's all these little scales of metal woven with leather together. Not how I did on the test model, completely the wrong way around, where I assumed it was leather panels with little metal studs in them. So that'll teach me for not looking at some of the artwork and having a read. But yeah, it's very, very fluid. So it runs over those surfaces super easy, fills them in really easy without having to sort of smash your brush in there all the time. And then for the banding, I wanted just to use what I thought would be a more interesting sort of bronze colour. So I've mixed up Runelord Brass and Garaghaks Sewer, which is a dark brown contrast paint, roughly 50-50. And then I'm just using that on the banding. Again, thinking to myself, okay, these will be similar tones to what I'm going to do with the leather as well. So it's just trying to keep it together. Then it was a case of going in and re-blacking out the leather areas. Is it called a hauberk? That's definitely a word I've read a lot when reading fantasy and medieval things. I'm going to go with hauberk, the sort of leather vest thing that it's over. And then I'm putting a very, very heavy wash, 50-50 mix, Garaghaks Sewer and Ratling Grime, both contrast paints, but I'm using them more like a wash here. Whilst it looks like and I am slapping loads of it on there, it is quite heavily diluted, so it's behaving a bit more like a wash than it is a contrast paint. But what I want it to do is really dull down that metal, make it look sort of aged and continually oiled and worn. But again, trying to be, you know, neat and tidy, even though fast and loose and neat and tidy don't really work together, do they? But that's that's the best way I can explain how I'm trying to paint here, deliberately, I guess. The fur or wool or hide bits on the model, I really wasn't quite sure how to go. Originally I was going to go with more of a brown sort of tones to them, like sort of, you know, your traditional sheepskins. But given the amount of brown on the rest of the model, I thought, and the fact that there's quite a few bits of bone on the model as well, that I was going to do sort of more brown. I thought, okay, let's go the other way with it then. Let's do more of a sort of blue-grey with it. So it's just a case of using dark sea grey and then adding in Dawnstone and Karak Stone to highlight it with. Nothing clever at all here. Much more to do with the actual colour that I was choosing rather than how to apply it. Love the shoes, love the boots. I think they're just a fab detail. Now on to the leather. So with the leather, as I said, I want to try and match more or less the colours that I was getting on the armour, on the metallic parts, but also keep it kind of boring so that we weren't pulling too much focus from that skin and the trousers. And one of them, the main sort of brown that I've used, is a recipe I recently sort of discovered, where I'm base coating it using Rhinox Hide, which are nice, sort of deep, dark, sort of reddy brown, and then very, very big jump to highlight it using Steel Elysian Drab. And I'm just doing that classic sort of loads of little taps and scratches along the edge to add a little bit of interest and make it kind of look like worn leather. Again, this is all relatively easy, This is all relatively simple to do. You do need a bit of brush control. I used a brand new set of brushes for this model. I probably shouldn't have, if I'm honest. I should have, I should have sort of worn them in a little bit. But the detail on the Mini, it's nice, it's defined. So it was relatively simple to just work my way around and carefully do that. And then one of my favourite stages, an oil wash. Now this was going to act like a wash, but to be honest with you, almost more of a filter or a glaze. So again, when I say glaze, I mean very, very thin layer of paint to slightly change what's underneath it. And I've done a few testers as ever, and for this I chose to use Shadow Brown by Absalom 502. I've mixed it using normal mineral spirits from the DIY shop. And you can see here, thin, very, very translucent layer. And I'm going to wash this over the entire model. I'm going to take my time. I'm not just going to slap it over. I don't want to have to go back in and remove anything. I haven't thinned it down to the point where it's going to separate. That's quite important. And that's really just getting to know your oils and having a sort of practice and a play around. But also when it is as thin as this, if I just really slap it all over, then it'll start separating out and stuff and just doesn't look very nice. So just working my way around various areas. I'm using an old natural hair brush here, but if you're going to use oils and mineral spirits and stuff, synthetic brushes are probably the go-to because it will destroy the natural hair. I tend to, when my natural hair brushes have given up on me for normal painting, they just go in the oil pot. And then we're on to finishing touches. So once the oil layer is dry, the Mini looks really nice, looks really cool, but it has kind of dulled everything down a little bit, and we want to bring that back. It's nice that it's filtered everything. It's nice that everything's got this kind of brown sort of tone to it, but it has dulled it all down a touch. So I'm just going to go back in, and particularly for things like the leather, just pick it out. I achieved what I wanted with the leather, which, as I said, was to kind of make the leather and the armour and all of that look kind of one and the same, like in those photos from earlier. But I do wonder whether they're too similar and potentially you lose the sort of difference with them. I don't know. It's a tough one. I like how it looks, but which I guess is all that matters. But yeah, I'm not sure whether maybe I should have. Maybe I suppose I could have left the brown out of the wash that I did on the metals. Maybe. I'm not sure. I like it. Let me know what you think in the comments. And now going back in here, really important stage for me, particularly after the oils and the contrast wash we put on earlier, is to just go in with our metallics and just bring back that little bit of shine. I'm using Iron Warriors there, similar colour, just thicker paint. And then down the two weapons as well. I'm going to be doing a couple more videos on this warband following up. So we're going to look at some of the more special characters. And oh, just dropped my notes there. Whoops. And that ice bear as well, which I think is super cool. So, for instance, I haven't talked about the bone in this video. That's because I'm going to cover that much more detail when I do one of the characters. And then in with a Runelord Brass here. I'm so happy with how this came out. I really am. Like, it's been really fun painting more fantasy stuff for you guys. I love sci-fi, don't get me wrong, but there's something about the things you get to paint with fantasy that I have missed painting so much of them, and this kind of style of leather and armor. Honestly, this is one of my favorite Orc minis I've ever seen. It's just something about it. I think it gets that ferocity. I think it gets that kind of savage but noble warrior thing. I just, yeah, really, really dig it. Now, I've left the eyes till last because I couldn't decide what to do with them. No other reason than that. And I'm still not entirely sure this was the right decision, but I needed to get the video done. And I like the look of it. I've just gone for blue. So it's Sotek green, which I've just started adding ivory into to highlight in the middle. And the reason for that in the end was I was like, well, they're coming from an icy place. You know, there's nothing to say that the eyes wouldn't be like that. I don't know. The box art and the artwork's got them with most of the time with like normal, like human type eyes, but then there's some other artwork that's kind of got glowy eyes. I don't know. I'm not into the glowy eye thing with these. Not this way I'm painting. I was very tempted, something like Andy did recently on that Stormcast video, but yeah, I like how it's come out. I'm not 100% sure it's what I want. Like I was like, oh, would red look good? But then I don't know, kind of think, do you know what, looking back now, watching it, yeah, blue was the right choice. It was. And there we go. She's all based up and looking fab. I'm really, really happy with how this paint job came out. For me, this is a perfect gaming level paint job. So no part of this was stressful to do. But layering up those techniques is lovely. And if you wanted to take it further, which perhaps we will do with a couple of the character models in the next video, we'll just add that next step. In fact, I think that's a nice idea. Let's do that for the next one. We'll do similar stuff, and then how would you take each step, you know, or each element of the miniature a few stages further. We'll go with that. It's a great idea. Note that one down. Yeah, I really, really, really do like her. This was my first time working with this type of plastic as well. I'd asked a few people. I think various people said Cast or something, something like that. Anyway, some sort of injection molded plastic. Painting it was wonderful. I don't know what it was, but you bang the primer over it and it just takes paint beautifully. Building and modelling it and stuff was more of a challenge because I'm not used to it. It's definitely softer than stuff I've worked with before. It's got a lot more flex, which should be good for gaming. But what I would say is if you want to take a better look at what the miniatures are like out of the box, and also from the gaming side of viewpoint, go and check out the guys over at Guerrilla Miniature Gaming. They've done a couple of fantastic videos on that, far better than I would do when it comes to the game side of things and all of that. You know, I very much stay in my lane with all of that. But yeah, I think in conclusion, if you want some nice sized, interesting fantasy miniatures with a ton of background to go on, just consider checking it out. We won't do any videos if we don't like the topic and we don't like the subject. So I'm really, really pleased Corvus Belli have reached out. Myself, Andy, Ben, we've all collected and played Infinity in the past. So, you know, the company's been around a long time. So I think you can be fairly confident in the level of support that you'll get for the game as well. Which again, I think is quite important if you're gonna sort of dive into something. But there's a ton of factions. I believe it was a successful Kickstarter, like a dungeon crawler or something to begin with. And now it's been made out into a sort of full tabletop game. But yeah, they talk about like mounted characters, and in the book there's a couple. There's like a sort of eagle phoenixy model, big mounted model for that. So yeah, I'm quite excited to see where this goes. But as I say, we'll do a few more videos in this. Let me know if there's anything you'd particularly like to see, and I will be able to cover that in those videos. Now, as ever, if you've got any questions about anything I've done, please pop them down in the comments, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks ever so much for all your support. Take care. I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done,
consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.